Are Cuban cigars the best cigars on the planet? Should you store your cigars in the refrigerator? Are Maduro cigars the strongest? Were Cuban cigars rolled on the thighs of virgin women? Wait, what the fuck? This week we're talking cigar myths, and we're going to go over a few of them here today. So we're going to debunk what is myth and what is fact on this edition of the Dad Smoking Cigars podcast. Hello, and welcome to the Dad Smoking Cigars podcast. With you as always, I am your host, Kyle D. Garrett, and the Dad Smoking Cigars podcast is sponsored by Casa Cuevas Cigars, from our Casa to yours, and Pariah Cigars. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I'm touching on a topic I don't think I've actually touched on before, at least not in this manner. See, there are a number of topics that are shrouded in myth and legend, and, well, cigars are no different. There are a number of myths regarding cigars, from where they came from, and how certain cigars are made, and which cigars are the best, and things like that. There are so many tall tales and myths and, crazy stories about cigars that are just completely untrue, and I'm going to go ahead and focus on the few that I found the most interesting. Before we get started, I wanted to share with you that I am smoking Apostate Cigars, the Deseret, and I love this cigar. I love this brand, and as you can see, I got the sticker up on my wall. If you haven't checked out Apostate Cigars, then I highly recommend that you do. Brandon and Kendrick, the two guys that own Apostate, are really great guys. Got to hang out with them at TPE, and they have made a genuinely good product, and there's an incredible story behind how these cigars came to be. So please, go check out Apostate. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. And with that, let's get started debunking some cigar myths. I'm only going to be listing 5 myths because there's a handful of them. There's quite a few. Some are more interesting than others, and some of them are just kind of meh. So again, I'm focused on the 5 that I found the most interesting, strange, bizarre, weird, or obvious. Some of these may be ones that you have wondered about yourself if you are new to cigars. For those of us who have smoked cigars for years, you may have never heard of any of these. We're starting at the number 5 myth, and we're going to work our way to 1. So let's get started. Myth number 5. This one I never heard before. I found it strange, and it definitely sounds like one of those things that, like, when you heard it, like, you're like, wait, what? Really? What? And that myth is that Cuban cigars, at least, doesn't specify when this practice might have been done, but that Cuban cigars were rolled on the thighs of virgin women. Because, obviously, I can't even imagine that being I don't think that's a workable surface to roll cigars. I would imagine you'd make a lot of mistakes, and it doesn't matter what kind of thighs you were rolling the cigars on. It's not a flat and level surface. You need a flat level surface to roll cigars. I've seen the videos. I've seen a rolling demonstration done in front of my very eyes, and you need a flat surface, and thighs, no matter who they belong to, they're not a flat surface. But this just kind of adds to the legend and mystique that is Cuban cigars, because, I remember before I smoked cigars, really got into it, I remember I asked my dad years ago, what's a Cuban cigar like? And he says, oh man, it's like puffing on air. Thinking back to that answer and thinking about it now, having consumed hundreds and hundreds of cigars, possibly thousands, I'm thinking to myself, what the fuck does that even mean? I'm pretty sure it just means that it's just it's just divine or something like that. But anyways, yeah, they did not roll at any point in history Cuban cigars on the thighs of virgin women, and if they did, I think it was like a one-off. And then they realized, nope, this doesn't work, so we're gonna have to go back to the table. So yeah, maybe it happened once, and it just after that they're like, nah, this just sounds like a weird male fantasy, which doesn't even sound that appealing, if I'm being 100% honest. The cigars would come out really wonky. So, believe what you want, I guess. Myth number 4. This one is a myth that all of us who are seasoned cigar smokers can tell you we've heard for years and years before we smoke them, after we smoke them, and that is this, that Cuban cigars are the best on the planet. Now, I have stated this, I don't even know how many times, so I'm going to keep it super short and sweet. I've smoked Cuban cigars. I've had some good Cuban cigars. And indeed, Cuban cigars are unique in their flavor profile and the fact that really it's tobacco you can't really get stateside. It's not sold here because the trade embargoes haven't completely lifted. Now you can bring them over here to the States from Cuba, but in limited amounts, and you can actually buy Cuban cigars from other retailers that sell overseas, although you may not necessarily be getting the genuine article, but it's up to you how you want to spend your money and what kind of risks you're willing to absorb. But that being said, Cuban cigars, they can be great. They can also be terrible, just like any other cigar out there. There are cigars that are absolutely just blah when you try them, and it could be a flavor issue, it could be a construction issue, it could be just they're using some weird ass tobacco grown in a location that tobacco is not normally grown in. And my point being is that there are good cigars, there are not so good cigars, and it doesn't matter if it's a Cuban, Dominican, Nicaraguan, Honduran, doesn't matter, because there are cigars out there that are complete misses and others that are home runs. At the end of the day, it's all subjective. If you think Cuban cigars are the best on the planet, then that is your prerogative. You can think whatever you like. Just don't expect everybody else to share that same opinion, because of the fact that they were more or less taboo for the better part of 60 plus years, because Cuba was under the dictatorship of Fidel Castro, and you had to jump through some serious hoops to get Cuban cigars. But I honestly think I can speak for the majority of the cigar community when I say that Cuban cigars, in my opinion, and it's opinion that is shared by many, they're not the best in the world. I don't think there is a best cigar or best tobacco in the world. There are just great cigars, and there are various different tobaccos and blends that are put into those cigars. It's all subjective, and it all depends on what you like. Myth number 3. You can and should store your cigars in the refrigerator. I don't know who came up with this. I don't know why they would think this is a good idea. I've heard a couple of things regarding this particular method of storing cigars. And that is like maybe they are over humidified and they're a little bit too saturated in terms of like the cigars are too moist. You can over humidify your cigars. If your relative humidity in your humidor is too high, yes, you can get some kind of soggy cigars, and that also runs the risk of moldy cigars. And so I've heard that it is recommended that you put your cigars in the refrigerator, so it kind of like pulls some of the moisture out, and then it kind of like, I don't know, it brings the cigar back to ideal conditions. I don't fucking know, but I can say with a fair amount of confidence and certainty that you really should not put your cigars in the fridge, because kind of like what I just stated before, it is going to pull all the moisture in your cigars out. The reason why cigars can last so long is if they're stored in ideal conditions. You can have cigars that were made 60, even like 70, 80, possibly even 100 plus years ago. If they have continued to be stored in excellent conditions, proper humidity, and things like that, cigars can last for a very long time, continue to age, and things like that. There are people who are cigar collectors in that they hunt down, obscure and rare cigars that were produced decades upon decades ago. And if they're stored in the proper conditions, they can last practically forever. You think about certain types of liquor, whiskey, rum, brandy, all those kind of the darker liquors, I'm kind of thinking, and wine, definitely wine. That stuff, if stored in ideal conditions, and when it comes to storing wine, you kind of have to put them in the right spot depending on what kind of wine they are. If you have a wine cellar or a wine cabinet or something like that, wine can last for years upon years upon years. If you get a rare wine that has been, sitting and aging well in proper conditions, it can be some of the most delicious wine you've ever tasted. Same thing goes with whiskey and similar spirits. Cigars are not much different in that they are fermented product. They're fermented tobacco leaves. They are aged for a certain amount of time before they are finally rolled into these wonderful things we get to smoke on a regular basis. And the thought of putting them inside of a refrigerator, just, oh my God, I mean, you would destroy them. They would destroy. They would expand and they would fall apart. At the very least, they would dry out. But if there's any moisture inside your cigar, you put it in the fridge, it's going to expand. It's going to ruin the cigar. Let's just put it that way. So please don't. I don't care who said what. I don't care what they told you. I mean, they might be someone that you trust, but then again, I've heard too many horror stories about people doing this. Now, if you want to get like a big ass cooler and you put your cigars in there and you throw some humidifier packets in there and you close it nice and tight, that can be an environment for cigars. You could even throw an ice pack or two in there to keep it a certain type of temperature, because my humidors are running around like 66, 67 degrees. So that way it's not too warm, it's not too cool, and I got the proper humidification in there. So yeah. Storing them in a refrigerator, putting them in a refrigerator is going to destroy them. It's going to ruin them. Don't do it. That is another myth that has been debunked. Myth numero dos. This one is another myth that I know a lot of us have heard, and it got some pretty fairly recent attention in terms of like what not to do when you're about to smoke a cigar. Jimmy was interviewing none other than mega superstar, former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger, who everyone knows is a huge cigar aficionado. He's been smoking cigars for roughly 40, 50 years, and Arnold tends to prefer Cubans usually and stuff like that, but that's not what we're going to get into right now. Long story short, Arnold took Jimmy to the Havana Room in Beverly Hills. The Havana Room is an ultra exclusive cigar club. You have to pay anywhere between $20,000 and $30,000 just to be a member. Don't quote me on that, that price point, but I have read a few articles that basically say people like, Sly Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bruce Willis, and a few others have been members of that club, and you got to pay a serious amount of cash in order to be part of that club. So Arnie takes Jimmy to the Havana Room and hands him a Cuban cigar, about $100 cigar as he put it, and Jimmy takes the cigar and starts licking it like a fucking popsicle, because you guessed it, Jimmy heard that somewhere, couldn't say where, that if you lick the cigar, it'll give it a slower burn and all that kind of nonsense. And Arnold basically told him, he's like, I told you to do there were two things you don't do. Don't cough and don't lick. And he completely blew it on both of those points. And yeah, you don't need to lick your cigar. First of all, it looks friggin' weird. Second, I just mentioned in the previous, myth, that if you store cigars in the ideal conditions, the proper humidification and the proper temperature, you don't need to do a damn thing to it except cut, light, and smoke it. I mean, yeah, even if the cigar is a little dry, licking it is not going to help. So you need to make sure that you put that cigar in the right conditions so that way it can kind of get rehumidified and you kind of revive the cigar, as it were. Now, I'll admit, sometimes when I'm smoking a cigar, especially if like the cap comes a little undone or there's one part of the wrapper that's sticking up, like one particular leaf decided to kind of fold upwards, I might give it a lick and kind of push down on the leaf or the part of the cap so it kind of adheres to the cigar. But that's on a very rare occasion when my cigar might be kind of falling apart in certain areas or just a little bit disheveled. I'll give it a lick, or I'll lick my finger and I'll just put the section of the leaf down so that way it doesn't keep popping up and my cigar risks falling apart. But chances are, if you licked the shit out of your cigar before you lit it, it probably wouldn't light properly because it's way too moist. I mean, you think about wet wood, you can't light wet firewood. If it is wet, it won't light. And similarly with a cigar, if it's too moist, it's not going to light properly, and you're not going to be able to enjoy it the way you want to. So don't lick your cigars, people. Please don't. It just looks weird, and it doesn't do anything special to the cigar. Before we get to the final myth, I'm going to go ahead and throw in a few honorable mentions that I won't go into at length, but there's just there's a lot of ground to cover, and these are the other ones that I think are worth bringing up. One myth is that if it's a Maduro cigar, that means it's super strong. Not necessarily. In fact, Maduro wrappers are usually toasted. They're giving kind of a darker, more bold, richer flavor as a result. And just because it's dark doesn't mean it's strong. Another myth is that you don't need a humidor to keep your cigars in proper shape. And if you want to have dry ass, just flaky cigars that will explode when you light them, and you will not get good flavor out of them, by all means put them out in the open if you want, but don't expect them to be in good smoking condition. Dipping your cigars in whiskey, cognac, tequila, what the fuck ever your poison is. I've seen instances of people doing that. Like, I've seen videos of people who kind of like lightly brush their cigar with like tequila or rum or whatever the hell they had, with like a little like thin cedar kind of strip. This sometimes you see in humidors, or you see like on wrapped around cigars in their packaging. And just lightly brush them with the liquor. I mean, you can do that if you want, but again, if you're dampening your cigar, there's a chance it won't light properly. And especially if you're dipping the foot into some sort of liquid or anything like that, it doesn't matter if it's if it's water or if it's liquor. Moistening the foot like that is going to gum it up pretty bad. It won't light properly because it's too wet, even though you are dipping it in alcohol, and alcohol is a flammable liquid. It's going to mess with your cigar experience. So I wouldn't recommend it. You can do it if you like, to each their own, but dipping it in liquid don't do that. Last honorable mention, the whole idea that if you pay a lot for a cigar, that must mean that it's good. Again, it's all subjective. Some people do pay top dollar for cigars that they enjoy, and they say that they're the best in the world. That's their opinion. That's their prerogative. It's not necessarily true. I have smoked some expensive stogies that did not even hold a candle to some of the far less expensive boutique cigars that I favor. And I don't know if it's just because, quality's dropped with some of these big name brands. I have brought that up before. But just because you pay a lot doesn't mean that you're getting a quality product. So just explore. Figure out what you like. Figure out what's worth your money. And that's pretty much all I have to say about that. But we're down to the number one, the final myth that we are going to debunk. And this one, I never heard it as a myth, but I have heard it suggested by certain organizations and institutions and stuff like that. And this particular type of cigar, tobacco, whatever you want to call it, has been there's been a lot of talk about it, and there's been even talk of banning it outright. And this final myth is that flavored cigars are geared towards kids, the youth, the children. Apparently flavored cigars, according to some, not many by the way, they're geared towards getting kids hooked on tobacco. Now let's break this down just for a moment. I'm going to get kind of serious here, and you're going to see that this won't stay serious for long. I'm going to say at the outset that I do not believe children should get their hands on tobacco at all. There's a legal age for a reason, because kids, when they get their hands on certain things, whether alcohol, tobacco, or certain types of substances, they don't know when, what their limits are or when they should stop. And you know what, they're far too young to be putting that kind of stuff into their body anyways, and especially when they know very little about it. In regards to tobacco, the easiest products for kids to get their hands on, and I want you to pay very close attention to what I'm saying, the easiest products for kids to get their hands on are cigarettes and vapes. It's alarmingly easy for kids to get their hands on that, because all they really have to do is know someone who is old enough to buy the tobacco products, or they figure out some other way to be able to purchase it. Now, it's no secret that the vape business, the vape, whatever you want to call it, they gear their flavors towards towards kids. They want kids to start vaping because apparently it's the more acceptable consumption of tobacco, or I should say nicotine products, which are derived from tobacco, blah 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 blah. I have no judgment if you are a person who smokes cigarettes or consumes vapes. There's a lot of people who do, and obviously there are some serious health risks attached to those things, and they have been well documented. This is in stark contrast to the consumption of premium cigars, even flavored and infused premium cigars. And I'll level with you just a little bit. I mean, they have like flavored cigarillos in those little 2-packs, usually at gas stations, grocery stores, and stuff like that. Kids could easily get their hands on those if they know someone, I guess. But even so, it's a very different, consumption. You do not inhale cigarillos. They do not have filters. They're not the kind of smoke that you would inhale or like a cigarette or vape. And more to the point, they have very basic flavors. Whereas the vape industry, they have a ridiculous amount of flavors. And some of them are like kids cereal flavored vapes. I don't know many adults who want to have Fruity Pebble flavored vapes or Fruit Loops or something like that. But that's definitely something that kids want, and the odds of them wanting to get their hands on premium tobacco is very, very slim. Kind of jumping back over to like cigars, just cigars, regular size cigars, anywhere from like a Corona, Robusto, or anything like that. Kids are not interested in smoking cigars, and I'll tell you why. It takes too fucking long. Kids do not have the patience for that. They do not have the patience to sit, nor do they have the time. It's hard enough to try and get away with smoking cigarettes, vapes, or even cannabis. Cannabis is legal, but obviously you have to be a certain age to buy that as well. But it's a lot easier to hide the fact that you're smoking a joint, taking a hit off a vape, or even smoking a cigarette than it would be to try and hide the fact that you're smoking even a relatively small cigar like a Corona, like I just said, or a Robusto. It can take anywhere from, let's just say for the sake of argument, you're smoking a Corona. Maybe it only takes 30 to 40 minutes for you to smoke that. That's still a considerable amount of time, and kids do not have any interest in sitting around, lounging around, and puffing on a cigar, enjoying, the good life, as it were. They don't have time for that kind of stuff, and more to the point, they don't really have any places to go to really do that. Access to premium cigars for anyone under the age of 21 is extremely difficult to do. Kids, they're not going to march into a lounge, obviously. They're going to know that they're too young to be there, so they're going to be like, get the hell out of here. You are way too young to be here. Come back when you're 21. And even in some of the smoke shops, if you look too young, like you have a baby face and they can tell you're under 21 at the very least, they're not going to let you waltz into their humidor and try to grab like an acid or a tabac or a Tatiana or something like that. They're not even going to be able to get to the humidor, much less get past the counter and try to pay for that shit, because they're going to know. They're trained to know that. Is that to say that there are absolutely no young people out there under the age of 21 who aren't interested, that are interested in trying, cigars or much less flavored cigars? No, I'm not saying that's impossible, but it's very, very unlikely, and most kids want the quick, easy, and simple. A cigarette on average takes anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to smoke at most, depending on how quickly you are taking drags off of it. And when it comes to vape, all you have to do is pop it out of your pocket, take a hit or two, and then you're done. And then you can put it back in your pocket and go back to what you were doing. That is something that kids are very interested in because it's quick, it's easy, and it gives them that whatever it is they're looking for, the nice nicotine buzz or just the flavor or whatever it is. The notion that flavored and infused cigars are a starter for kids to get into tobacco is absolutely ludicrous. There are far faster and easier avenues and much more affordable products that they could get their hands on, and cigars are definitely not within the price range of a an adolescent young adult who hasn't quite reached the legal age to purchase tobacco. The FDA would try to argue otherwise, and those who are so anti-tobacco that they froth at the mouth at the idea of anyone smoking any type of tobacco, whether premium cigars or genetically modified tobacco that you find in cigarettes or vape, whatever. No tobacco. We don't want any tobacco for anyone. And, they will try to point fingers and saying, flavored and infused cigars are for kids to get hooked. And it's just like, no, it's not. No, it's not. Kids are not at all interested in trying to get their hands on premium cigars. I mean, unless they want to try and raid their old man's stash or his humidor, and they just want to try it, try it and see if they like it. I mean, that would be one of the very few ways they could get their hands on a premium cigar, flavored, infused, or otherwise. And the whole idea that flavored cigars are geared towards kids and young people is ridiculous. So there you have it, guys. Those are some cigar myths for you. Some of them you may have heard, some of you may never have heard. If you're new to cigars, maybe you had some burning questions that hopefully just got answered. There are a lot of myths surrounding cigars. There were some I didn't even mention, some that I might have skipped just because I felt the ones that I brought up were the most interesting in my opinion. But I know that there's plenty of other myths about cigars out there that are just as ludicrous as the ones I mentioned. And it is extremely important to educate yourself and to actually do the research through the proper channels, through trusted sources and friends. I mean, make sure you're getting your information from credible places. Don't just piggyback off of things you've heard, that you read somewhere, that you heard somewhere, and you can't even verify it. Make sure that you're getting educated on cigars, and make sure that you also educate yourself for the purpose of answering other people's questions, because there are some people who try to put you on the spot. They'll just say, well, what about this? Isn't one cigar just as bad as 100 cigarettes? And, et cetera, et cetera. That's another myth, and it's bogus, by the way. One cigar is not the equivalent to 100 cigarettes. I feel like that if that were the case, one cigar would kill you. It would just kill you right there. So educate yourself, make sure you got the right information, so that way you will know exactly how to answer certain questions and how to debunk the myths that are prevalent among the cigar community, so that way people can actually enjoy the cigars that are available to them. Anyways, guys, I think that's a good place for me to put a pin in it. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope it was entertaining and informative, and that you got something from it. If you did and you haven't already, please do subscribe. Be sure to like this video, leave me a comment. I love interacting with you guys in the comments section, and maybe share this video with someone you think might like it. In any case, I'm glad you're here, and I appreciate your support, and I appreciate you checking out this video. But that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much again for tuning in. I hope you guys are doing fantastic, staying healthy, keeping it smoky, of course, and as always, I will catch you in the next one.